take seriously. These are really extraordinary, and they're not easy to find.
Yeah.
We have a case of them from India, and I would advise you to take a good look at them. We have one open. You can take a really good look at that one, but we have some at the back before you leave. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you to IHCD and to Valerie for the opportunity to present our work at the Boston Design Week Inclusive Design Open House. It's a long term. In the next half an hour or so, Devashri and I will talk you through the research process and the findings of the book Architectures of Transition, Emergent Practices in South Asia, which both of us co-authored with Professor Rahul Mahrota at the GSD. The book was published as a part of a larger project, which was titled The State of Architecture in South Asia, which we began in 2021 at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. The project examines architecture across the countries in South Asia that you can see on the map, which is Afghanistan, Bhutan, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. Across the world today, we are experiencing numerous transitions and uncertainties, which include climate change, political transformations, socio-economic shifts, amongst many others. However, due to the explosive population growth and socio-economic disparities in South Asia in particular, these are exacerbated, and a version of these is something that you experience in your everyday life. Given this intensified context, our project collectively poses a question: does architecture matter in this state of transition, and what role can it play in shaping our societies at large? We chose to look beyond political boundaries and look at this as a region, more because we share a collective history, and the hope was to create a platform where reflections can be gathered that can be mutually beneficial, and create a common ground across the region. Going forward, we think this will be even more of an important issue given the intensified effects of climate change. So on the screen is a bioregional map of South Asia, where each cluster is not a political boundary, but a boundary of an ecological region. And for those familiar with the region, you can pretty much see, for example, the eastern part of India shares more ecological similarities to Bangladesh, or the western part of Punjab in India would share more ecological and cultural similarities with Pakistan than, let's say, Mumbai would. These geographical adjacencies and also shared histories pushed us to look at studying the region beyond political boundaries and create a platform for facilitating knowledge exchange amongst countries. One of the initial questions of the research was understanding the history of patronage for architecture and for architects, and thinking about how we move the gaze away from the legacy of modernism in the region. The other question was, what are the current precedents in South Asia relevant more locally? What is the kind of work the current generation is doing? And this was all crucial in understanding, because architecture was truly a crucial tool in nation building, because most of these countries are relatively newly independent countries, and architecture played a significant role. These projects range from civic buildings, new cities, housing projects, and institutions. And these are just some of the examples of the large-scale efforts that were undertaken by nation states to assert their regional identities post-independence. In Sri Lanka, the architects made a conscious effort to respond to local, I must add that that was the case for the Indian subcontinent, which is India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. On the other hand, Sri Lanka, towards the 70s, the architects made a conscious attempt to respond to their local context and establish a regional identity through their architecture. On the other hand, Afghanistan in the 60s and the 70s was caught up in the Cold War politics and benefited from the competing efforts of the Soviet Union and the United States to invest resources in developing public buildings and infrastructural projects. Meanwhile, Bhutan and the Maldives, under very specific kinds of patronage, different from the other countries, were isolated during the decades of modernization. However, they seamlessly continued traditional architecture, which has been codified organically as a norm and also endorsed by the formal state. Towards the 90s, with the onset of neoliberal economy and opening up the economies to the global world across South Asia, there was a retreat in the role of the state and an increased influence of private players in the economy. The patrons of architects since then and today are largely private industrialists, developers, and private homeowners. And unlike the previous generations, the role of architects today in shaping the public sphere and our cities at large is diminishing. With this background of South Asia, we began an exploration of identifying and giving voice to projects and practitioners that are making an active attempt to engage in the public realm. And an open question to us was how, as a profession, we can reclaim this role. The first step of the research was a virtual lecture series we conducted at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, where we invited 24 emerging practices, young practices in the first decade of their practice, and focused on projects and conversations on architecture in the public realm. Through the book, we expanded this research to identify more architects, roughly practitioners around the age of 40 or a decade of practice, who have made a conscious effort to either find patronage or construct patronage to influence the public realm. The emphasis on young architects was intentional because the assumption was that their work mirrors the state of architecture in South Asia, embodying its current aspirations, challenges, and even hopes. And finally, the publication includes 41 emergent architectural practices, 72 projects, reflections from scholars across South Asia, an essay that frames the context that we went over a little bit earlier, a graphic taxonomy of plans and building types, and a series of infographics based on a survey of these practices to gain some insights into the emerging patterns of practice. So this is it's not very clear on the screen right now, but this is a map of the geographical location of practices included in the book. We made an active effort to have a balanced representation from all countries, but you can tell that there are more practices from India and Bangladesh, and the Maldives is completely absent. And this imbalance could perhaps be attributed to different stages of economic growth, different types of patronage, political conditions that enable public projects, and also the locations of architecture schools, because people tend to set up practices in and around these academic centers. It was also a challenge to achieve a balanced gender representation, particularly due to the focus on practitioners under the age of 40. Again, it's not very clear on the screen, but this is the map of the geographical location of the 72 projects that are featured. So, and there's a very clear predominance in urban spaces, indicating disparities in the distribution of public projects and also access to patronage. Throughout this research, what we started observing was a broadening spectrum of concerns that younger architects today are actively dealing with, which was not necessarily the concern of architects in the previous generation. The expectations from younger architects today is to be responsive and responsible, and that has multiplied. We observed an increase in involvement with sites of conflict, engagement with remote underrepresented communities, reimagining forms of affordable housing, and advocating for new forms of infrastructure in cities. And in the next few slides, we'll talk about it as we move forward. So the first project that we will be discussing is a school for blind children in Ahmedabad. This was designed by the firm that is called C-Lab, run by Anand Sonecha. The first thing that stood out to us was the design process. The team actively engaged with the blind community of children, using various modes of communication to discuss the design of the space. You see a tactile 3D printed plan of the design, which the children could feel, touch, interact, and even give feedback to designs. The different programs were identified in Braille, and different tactile patterns were used to identify various circulation spaces. They also conducted a tactile 3D model of space for the children to interact and give feedback, like I said earlier. They integrated furniture details in 3D to help children understand the spatial organization and scale. While this may seem routine in some practices, I think this is way above and beyond a typical design process in across studios in South Asia. And I mean, you can see how engaged the students were and how happy the students were while engaging with the models. C-Lab experimented extensively with various patterns for wall textures, finishes, which ranged from smooth to rough surfaces to guide students through through the spaces. During construction, the contractor created full-scale mock-up of some patterns, which is 1:1, allowing the students to test different wall plaster textures to assess their effectiveness. Eventually in the school, the two longer sides of the corridor have horizontal textures versus the shorter sides have vertical textures. This helps students identify which side of the corridor they're navigating. The sound of their voice or the walking steps changes based on the echo that the corridor or each of these spaces produced. And the design attributes different heights and widths to corridors, to classrooms, so that children can recognize them through sounds and echoes. Many of the students had low vision. They could distinguish spaces that had the contrast of light and shadow or high color contrast. The doors, the furniture, the switchboards, and other accessories were designed to have high contrast from their surroundings so that the students can easily differentiate between them while they navigate the space. And since students with low vision are sensitive to direct sunlight, the classrooms have indirect filtered light from private courtyards and skylights in some locations. The landscape also has a significant role in the design. Courtyards, which you're seeing next to the classroom here, with aromatic plants, are located next to classrooms and connected to the corridors, which becomes a tool for wayfinding based on their location. This is the central courtyard of the entire school, which has its own lush of aromatic landscape to help with identification. Moving on to the next project that we're talking about, in 2019, the same office, C-Lab, worked with a vulnerable community of 500 people affected by leprosy in Gujarat, which is towards the western part of the country, where the houses were damaged by the floods annually. So every year it would flood and it would recede, damaging people's homes quite often. This is a before and after image of the same house. The white structure that you're seeing there with the red steps is the thing that they built, which is really low cost and very local. And this is an image of the street after it was constructed during one of these floods, where only because of its calculated plinth and a raised thing, it was safe. For this project, again, they closely engaged with the community, and due to language barriers, they made these really large-scale models with dimensions written on it, so people not familiar with a design process could understand it, engage with them, and give feedback. They built really detailed 3D models, again, with furniture, trying to understand people's domestic needs and understanding activities that would be useful to be integrated within the space. And this was very useful for the community to see it in 3 dimensions versus static plans and sections. They tried to understand each family's very specific needs, and then they built custom flood-resilient budget homes for all of them. The masons constructing the house were not adept at reading construction documents, so the architects added detailed dimensions on models that the masons used as a construction guide. This was, again, extremely sensitive, going above and beyond and creating a unique way of communicating to your to your community?
In 2017, the arrival of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar to Bangladesh led to a dire need for adequate infrastructure in the region. This practice by Rizvi Hassan and his team, they moved to these refugee camps in the Teknaf and Ukhia region in Bangladesh, and they worked closely with the community to build this cultural memory center that you see an aerial image of. And this was an attempt to fight back for the community's lost identity, and they employed numerous creative explorations and processes that we can go through. The community, when they situated themselves in the community, they came forward with a lot of indigenous knowledge, techniques, ways of life, and stories that help visualize the appropriate approach for designing this cultural center. The community members themselves participated in building the center. Here you can see the members using palm leaves to build the roofing, using the indigenous techniques. The elements that compose this space were also outcomes of design sessions and hands-on workshops. For example, the artisans in the community were asked to reflect on their favorite memory or story through the design of a small window. So personal houses, fishing, elephants, birds, paddy fields, and all other memories that were expressed by the community on these windows now stand together on this wall, reflecting a sense of togetherness in a very distressing time. And the displaced community had so many stories that could help foster that sense of belonging during this distressing time. And the architects used that opportunity to incorporate their artwork in the space to further create a sense of goodwill in this unsettling situation. The same group of architects also built a women's center in this community. The aerial image shows this center, which was built with very vernacular local materials, and it offered adolescent girls and women in the surrounding camp area a safe place to bathe, a place to complain about abuse and violence, a place where they could learn to share and create. It offered them an opportunity to spend the day with fellow women in the camp, which could help bring positive psychological change. A very simple introverted courtyard ensures privacy and freedom for the women who are part of a relatively conservative community, and this just becomes that safe space for them. They can learn, share, express themselves freely in the space than they would be able to outside amidst their community. In 2019, PARA, a practice based in Bangladesh, collaborated with 50 children residing in a homeless shelter in Dhaka and worked with them to develop a design brief. Of these 50 children, 20 children had disabilities. This is a practice that strongly again believed in the power of participatory design. First, to the workshop, they even questioned the program that they were commissioned and worked with the students to even understand what they wanted next to their homeless shelter. They were actually commissioned to build a toilet, but actually working with the students, they realized they actually wanted a playscape next to their shelter. And they did not build the final model and then go to the children, but instead they conducted these workshops to build the 3D model with them. So the children were encouraged to use small elements and craft to incorporate features that they would like to see in this playscape. And finally, at the end of these multiple discussions and workshops, they came down to the final elements that would be incorporated in the playscape. And one important request that came from the children during these sessions was their friend Shamim, who was on a wheelchair, should also be able to access and reach the top of the playscape. And so the design ensured that there was this continuous ramp so that Shamim could also go all the way to the top and join the rest of the children. This is a picture of Shameen moving up through the playscape on the ground. This practice also has a large educative component to their model. They conduct a lot of frequent training programs for students, organize exhibitions, and participatory workshops to complement their build work, which is why their work is so informed. They often always root themselves and situate themselves in the community and identify problems and design solutions, and then try to go out there and advocate for them, find funding for them, which is almost a reverse process in some ways. This firm, made in Mumbai, extensively surveyed public toilet facilities across India, and they conceptualize new typologies that are unique to different urban conditions, and they showcase their vision through a traveling exhibition. Through this reimagining and advocacy that they did through this traveling exhibition, they actually got a contract with the government to work on the new construction of 100 new public toilets across the country. This one here is the Urban Loo, which is one of the public toilets they have finished constructing and is located outside a railway station in Hyderabad in India. The site is surrounded by numerous bus stands and a sprawling market. So the design takes into consideration the large volume of people that are going to use this public toilet upon exiting the railway station. And as a response to this footfall, they designed it to be extremely porous with local slate stone, which brings an abundance of natural light and natural air inside the building, which not only removes the foul smell, but also choreographs the internal experience of light and shadows. This kind of natural light and good ventilation is very rare to see in a public toilet, especially in South Asia, and that contributes greatly to creating a humane environment. And most public toilets in India fail in this respect of good ventilation, and it's almost impossible to actually use it then. This is an example of another restroom, but it is more than a restroom in this condition. This is a complex that is located along a highway in India, and it is a space that hosts an array of different facilities that serve long-distance truck drivers who are the frequent users of highways. And it is sensitively designed to have several different access points defining separate facilities for different user groups. For example, the main entry features a recessed niche for like senior citizens and differently abled people, so that they don't have to go deep into the complex to access the facilities, and it's right at the entrance for them. The women's section has a nursing station and a sanitary napkin vending machine, which is again very rare to see in a public toilet in South Asia. Natural light and ventilation makes this restroom feel open, airy, and welcoming. Light plays an important role in public spaces as women feel safe in well-lit and ventilated public spaces, and this is a good example of that. This is the men's section, which is also light-filled with natural vegetation, and it has urinals designed for children, which is again rare to see. As I mentioned before, this complex serves the needs of truck drivers. So there are spaces for them to refuel, eat, unwind. And here you can see a resting space with beds for truck drivers to stop between their journeys and catch a break. Since these truck drivers are always on the move, there's almost no time for them to go back to their homes between their trips. And so there are facilities like a small hair cutting salon or a pantry and a designated space for washing and drying clothes that has been sensitively incorporated into the design specifically for this user group that would frequent this restroom along the highway. There's also a tuck shop that's located at the entrance for quick refreshments that passers-by or truck drivers could easily grab. And all of this has been incorporated into a restroom along that highway. So this was a quick glimpse into few projects that are featured in the book. And according to us, each architectural practice and project represented in the book responds in a very unique way to their urban and social conditions. At the end of this process, we wanted to understand the overall patterns that could be traced across the region through the lens of these 41 practices. And to identify some patterns, we conducted a survey of among these 41 practices to inquire about the range of projects that they are undertaking, what their organizational structures were, who was funding the projects, and how they were kind of making it all work. And though the survey was small, but we think that the results provide a valuable proxy for the current trends. And over the next few slides, we'll take you through some of these patterns and survey results. So this image is a bit unclear, but what we tried to do here is that we mapped the number of years each principal architect took post their bachelor's or master's degree to set up their practice. And we observed that most principals transitioned swiftly, with over 60% of them establishing their own firms within 5 years of graduating. And this is mainly because of extremely low salaries offered in the architectural industry in South Asia, which make it difficult to sustain in an architectural job long term. The diagram on the left speaks to the size of the practices featured in the book and groups them based on the number of employees. Most firms are small to medium sized, with 50% of them falling in the category of 5 to 20 employees, and only 7 firms had more than 20 employees. On the right, looking at their demographic makeup, it is obvious that the workforce in these firms was predominantly young, with individuals between 20 to 30 making up 62% of the workforce, and those between 30 to 40 add only up to 29%. We were very pleased to see that there's an increasing sensitivity towards gender inclusivity and balance. 50% of the practices have a balanced male-female workforce, and about 10% declared the inclusion of non-binary employees. To understand the spectrum of projects these practices were undertaking, we tried to examine the relative distribution of the firm's portfolio across various domains such as institutions, private residential, community initiatives, repair, conservation, interior design, or allied design services. So each bar represents the distribution that each practice has within these different domains. And it was obvious that private residence dominated the type of projects that were being commissioned, with a striking 80% of the practices largely working on single-family houses. And in comparison, only 30% of the practices were actively involved in community initiatives, advocacy, repair, and conservation. And this is what we were hinting to, that participating in the public realm due to the patronage or the commissioning is receding in South Asia currently, and these young practices have to make a very active effort to create that patronage for these public projects or the initiatives that they would like to endeavor. We also observed that 65% of the practices expanded into allied design services, such as exhibition, product, furniture, and graphic design, to complement their architectural practice to create an additional stream of income. We were also curious to map the different patronage, such as private corporate, institutional, public-private development, the state, civil society, and NGOs that enable the 72 projects in the book. And we correlated the patronage to the project's budget and the project's area, which is represented by the size of the circle. Through this, it was clear that projects supported by institutions, civil societies, and NGOs lean towards a mid-sized budget ranging from 10,000 US dollars to 30,000 with a fast completion rate pointing to their limited resources. And it's worth noting that 15 out of the 72 projects featured in the book are built within a budget of 10,000 US dollars each and were completed within a year, hinting at expedited, budget-conscious undertakings such as repair work or community-based interventions, which are often addressed with urgency. After studying these patterns and speaking to practitioners featured in the book, we realized that there's been an evolution in the model of practice to adapt to the region's unique challenges. So the cross-subsidy model is becoming increasingly common, where architects work with developers on commercial projects so that they can fund their community-driven endeavors and so find a balance between the economics of practice and the commitment to social good. The historical perception of architects as the sole authors or the decision makers of a project is also being redefined. Now, many architectural practices are gravitating towards non-traditional organizational structures. They're positioning the makers, the collaborators, a range of specialists as invaluable partners and giving them much more agency in the design process. As you saw, that there's been a surge in community outreach initiatives where architects were acting more as facilitators, creatively employing communication tools that are sensitive to diverse users. Overall, we noticed that there was an increased empathy in the way that the emerging generation was dealing with the community that they were serving. And they were making an active effort to engage and address the social and economic disparities that exist within the region. For us as young architects starting out, it was inspiring to see and observe these patterns of practice. And we hope that this democratization of design will lead to a more inclusive and empathetic built environment. This is just an image of all the practices featured in the book that were also exhibited in the form of a traveling exhibition that was launched in Delhi in India. And this will now be traveling to Bhutan, Afghanistan, and Sri Lanka in the next year. And our hope is that with each location that it goes to, we work with local curators to add more emerging practitioners, and so that the conversation keeps expanding and getting more enriched. Thank you for listening to us, and here is a QR code to our project website where you can get more information on other components of the project, the lecture series, the conference, the traveling exhibition, the podcast, and the digital archive. And we're open to any questions you may have, and feel free to go through the books that are on the side here. Thank you.